When we see the word of in a problem, okay, what operation is that? Yeah, multiplication, right? Of is multiplication. So we want to do what is 15% of $1.75. That's what we're trying to find out because that's how much we're going to save here, right? But we can't use 15% in a math problem. That's a percentage. A percentage is out of 100, which means that's like 15 out of 100. And when you divide something by 100, what are you doing to the decimal place? Anybody know? Yeah. Exactly. You're moving it 2 places to the left. So that's 15% right there. So the decimal's right there. So to use it in a math problem, we want to make it a decimal. So we have to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So instead of using 15, I'm going to use 0.15. Because if I punched in 15 times $1.75 on my calculator, it would have given me some huge number that wouldn't make any sense in this situation, right? So when you punch in 0.15 or 15 hundredths times $1.75, that comes out to, like, if you round to 2 decimal places, about 0.26, 26 hundredths, right? Now, that's not the answer to my question, though. What does this number actually stand for here? Yeah, how much I saved, how much I get off, right? Because I want to figure out how much is 15% of this. So I'm actually saving just over a quarter. I'm saving 26 cents here, okay? So to figure out what the final cost is, I'm obviously going to do what then? Yeah, just subtract it from the original. I'm going to take my $1.75. I'm going to subtract my 26 cents, $1.49. So that's how much I would actually pay for this candy bar, right? Now that's when I figured out how much percent off it is. What about if I is it possible that I could do this maybe in one step? That's a perfectly good way to do it, and you could do it that way. But let's think about this. If the candy bar is 15% off, okay, what percent am I actually paying for the candy bar then? I'm not paying 100%, it's 15% off. So what percent am I paying? Yeah, Jake. 85. I'm actually paying 85% of it, right? So instead, I could figure out what is 85% of $1.75, and that would give me how much I'm paying, right? If I took $1.75 times 0.85, because remember I have to move the decimal from a percentage to the left, I'm taking out of 100, divided by 100, that would give me how much I'm paying. But the other way is a perfectly good way to do it. Just make sure you answer what the question asks. If it says how much off is it, you just take it times 0.15 or 15 hundredths. If it says what are you paying for it, you could actually do it in one step because you're actually paying for 85% of it since it's 15% off. We'll split the difference here and we'll go $55, okay? We're saying these shoes you're going to buy are $55, okay? And, of course, there's sales tax. And we're going to say the sales tax, it's somewhere around this. I don't know off the top of my head, but the sales tax in Kansas is somewhere around 8.8%, right? Because when you go buy shoes and it says the price tag's on $55, you can't just give $55 and walk out the store, right? You have to pay the sales tax. Okay, and it's somewhere around this, but let's just assume it's 8.8%. Okay, so I need to figure out, okay, if I want to buy these shoes, what's actually the cost of this going to be? Right. So I need to figure out what is 8.8% of $55, because that's going to tell me how much in sales tax I have to pay. And when I see the word of, that means multiplication. Right. So I'm going to take 55 times 8.8%, but that's as a percentage. A percents are out of 100, means I divide by 100, so I need to move the decimal 2 to the left. But when I moved it 2 to the left, what do I put in this place here? Yeah, 0, right? I got to move it 0.088. Punch that in my calculator, I get about $4.84. And again, that's not the answer, that's just the sales tax in this problem. Okay? Which means what am I going to do to find how much I'm paying for these shoes? Yeah, Jacob. Yeah, add them, right? 55 plus 484. So I'm going to pay about $59.84 for these shoes. Originally $55. So here I had to add the percentage to it. It wasn't a percent off. The sales tax increased the price. Need something else we're going to buy. Somebody give me something.
A DVD.
Yep. Xbox. Okay, you're going to buy an Xbox. Okay. And let's say it cost, I don't know, $299. Let's talk some mental math here. Let's say you walk into a store and a guy tells you, I'll give it to you for 10% off. Take it or leave it. Okay? And, you don't want to pull out a calculator right here and you want to do it quickly. How can we do, by show of hands, somebody tell me, how can we do 10% very quickly to find out how much we're saving? Here, yeah, Victoria. Okay, you could do it that way. You could go by rounding, but there's even an easier way when we're talking 10%. Anybody got that? When you multiply by 10%, that's the same thing as moving the decimal one to the left. Okay, so if you got 10% off, you would actually be saving $29.90. Okay, when you find 10% off, you just move the decimal one place to the left. Right. So then, if you want to figure out the cost, you would take this and subtract it from $29.90. Okay, so that's how we would go with 10%. So let's give another situation. Something else to buy.
TV.
Okay, TV.
59-inch.
Okay. And it's going to be $450. Okay. And let's say I want to go, I get a discount, and I get a 20% discount. Okay. And I want to figure this out really quick in my head without punching it in the calculator. Well, remember, everything, when you take it by 10%, is really easy. What would be 10% of this? $45, right? If you move the decimal one to the left, 10% would be $45. So 20%, knowing that, should just be what? 90. It just double that, right? To get from 10 to 20, I double that. So to get from 45 to 90, I would just double that. So I know 20% of this is $90 real quick in my head without having to do anything, because I know what 10% is. Okay? Does that make sense? So I know if I got 20% off, I would just take $90 off of that. And let's say, last one. All right, I need one more thing to buy. We went backpack. And let's say that's going to cost us, I don't know, $36. Okay. And let's say it's we get 5% off of this. And I want to figure this out really quickly in my head. Well, remember, 10% is really easy. What's 10% of this? $3.60, right? 10% is $3.60. So 5% would be what? $1.80, right? Just half of that, because 5 is half of 10. So anything that's around 10, half of 10, double 10, triple 10, should be really easy to figure out without a calculator, because 10% is really easy to figure out without a calculator. So that's how we can do some of this mentally in our head really quick when we're talking about multiples of 5. Okay? If it was 15%, you could find 10% and then find 5% and just add those two things together, right? So a lot of that can be done mentally. All right, last thing I want to talk about here. All right, I need another new item. Something. I heard iPad last time. So let's say you have an iPad, and the original price of it, what's that, $500? It's $500. And let's say it gets discounted, and it's now $420. So the original price was $500, and the new price is $420. And I want you to know I want to know how much percent off that is. What's the percent of change? So obviously it's a percent decrease, right? I decreased. I got cheaper. It's a percent decrease. So I want to know what's the percent decrease here. How much did I decrease this amount? Okay. And I want to know what's the percent of $500, because what percent of $500 did I decrease this amount? Well, I saved $80, right? The difference between these is $80. So I want to know 80 is what percent of 500? Okay. And let's write that algebraic equation in our head. I want to say 80 is, so when I see the word is, what operation, or what do I write? Not operation. Equals. 80 is what percent, so some unknown percent, of is multiplication, the original amount. I want to know what percent of $500. Right? And I can solve this equation for x by doing what? Dividing by 500, right? I undo that multiplication, I divide that by 500. You do that, and it gets to be 1600ths, or 0.16. That's not the answer to the question, though. That's a decimal. I want to know how much percent off is this. It's 16%, right? Because just like to go from a percent to a decimal, you move it 2 to the left. To go from a decimal to percent, you move the decimal 2 to the right. So this would be a 16% decrease, right? And all I really did was I took the difference in the two numbers and I divided it by the original amount. Right? That's all I'm really doing here. But here's what the algebra looked like. I took the difference in the two numbers and divided it by the original amount. All right, so let's try one or two of those. Okay, you're going to buy a calculator. And the original price of the calculator is $80. Okay. The new price of the calculators, $110. I want to know, what is the percent increase here? What percent did I increase this calculator by? What percent did I increase 80 by? So give that a shot and we'll check it together. Okay, well first, how many dollars did it go up? It went up 30, right? Went up $30. So I want to know 30 is what percent of 80? Because it went up $30, so I want to know 30 is what percent of 80? 30 is some unknown percent of 80. And remember I said all you're really doing in these problems is you're taking the difference in the two numbers, whether it goes up or whether it goes down, the positive difference, and you're dividing it by the original amount. So you're taking 30 divided by 80. When you do that, you get 0.375 equals X, right? So what percent did this increase, this calculator, this new one increase in? Yeah. Yeah, it'd be 37.5, right? Because you have to move the decimal 2 back to the right. You have to take it out of 100, multiply by 100. Okay. And it went up 37.5%. In these percent of change problems, you're just taking the difference in the two numbers and you're dividing it by the original amount because you want to figure out what percent of the original amount. Is it a percent increase or a percent decrease? So, without a calculator, I want you to try this without a calculator. You walk into wherever store you're buying your fridge from, and the guy, whatever, salesman meets you and gives you these two deals. Or let's say you go to two different stores, you get these two deals. And you just have to figure out, you got to decide on the spot which one are you buying. You want the cheaper one, right? They're the exact same thing. Do you want the $475 fridge for 10% off? Or do you want the $460 fridge for 5% off? So let's use mental math here. 10% off of this one, how many dollars off is that going to be? $47.50, right? You move it one to the left. That's 10% off. 5% off of this one. Well, let's figure out what is 10% off of this one. Yeah, 10% would be $46, right? So 5% would be $23. You with me there? Because 10% was $46, so 5% is half of 10%. So half of $46 would be $23. So then I can just compare. If I take $47.50 off of this, how many dollars is that?
400. 42 something.
There you go. $427.50.
Oh, I see. Never mind.
Right? Okay. And this one would be how much?
434, 32, 37.
Yeah,
Right?
130.
So that would be the better deal.